Either you've hired incompetent product managers, like that's definitely one signal, sure, maybe, or you've got people that can't relinquish control. I mean, that's the other side of it, right? Like if we're going for extremes, if we're only showing barbell graphs right now,
I think you can attribute this to both sides. I mean,
Sure.
If you've made bad hiring decisions, then it kind of feeds into the lack of trust because people can't do the job. But you hire them, well, you're not going to entrust them with pricing decisions. So where does this go in the long picture?
I'll tell you where it goes. It goes to Marty Kagan's Empowered. That's right. And Marty Kagan's Empowered 2020. I think he wrote Empowered in 2020. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to check that reference when the podcast is over. I won't. Let's be honest. He says organizations that centralize pricing decisions in executive or finance functions typically operate as feature factories. That's what he says in his book. I didn't make that up. I could completely make up Marty Kagan quotes. Actually, that should be a whole podcast we do is made up Marty Kagan quotes.
That sounds like a fun one.
Sounds like a fun one.
Oh, my goodness.
But I don't think this is fake.
Yeah, the people that are closest to those decisions and are refusing to let go, they're going to propagate this environment.
Well, I'm going to start right away with the steelman.
Let's
hit
go.
my music. Steelman. That's right. Listen, pricing affects company valuation and investor relations. Like pricing is too critical of a business function to be delegated to any one product manager. Sorry, you looked at me and you knew in my brain I was
exactly
like, but also like that ruinous empathy right there. That's right. I'm lifting that term from the last podcast. Like that is what the executives are thinking. Is like, oh, who's this guy? I'm not giving him that like lack of empathy right there. That I saw in your eyes. I saw a flash in your eyes right there.
It was right there.
That's what the executives are thinking. They're like, who is this kid? This product management kid with 20 years of software experience. Like, I went to Harvard. How dare he? That's what they're thinking is it's too important of a business function. I should do it because I'm big and important. But that's what they're thinking. If I'm not going to be a jerk for once. The other side of this is executive experience provides market perspective that the PMs lack. They haven't been in my market long enough. Maybe I'm a sales executive, right? Maybe I'm a 20-year sales executive, and this PM came from like logistics or whatever, and we work in healthcare tech or whatever. You don't know anything about health. I know about pricing in health tech, and you're not qualified. That would be the trade-off here.
I understand that. I think that has some legitimacy, right? Because people that you just hired from the domain that you've had a long stay experience in, but that's fine. That does not mean it needs to be binary, though. Still, I would still maintain all that's saying is, by all means, go in, but invite someone else to examine what your basis is, right? Your assumptions, and say, this is how I'm arriving at this pricing conclusion. What do you think?
We talked about the steelman of like, well, the executives, like they have the experience and the product managers don't. And, they think that it's super important because it affects company valuation, and product managers don't sit at that level. And that's where their bonuses, like the executives and like VPs and stuff, that's where their bonuses and stuff are. So it's like, it's too important to them personally. And boy, they won't delegate that stuff. That's the slippery slope. That's like the gently rolling Irish countryside of moss-covered stones that are always wet because it's always raining or misty out, where they won't delegate that stuff, and then they just slip into like, well, now we won't delegate all this other stuff as well, which includes product strategy and what features you build next and all kinds of stuff that has to do with, basically, you're not even doing product management.
Now you put your product management in a sack, tie their hands behind their back, and chuck them into the Atlantic or Pacific, whatever.
Well, you just built the weapon, and you're using it for everything. We can't let the product managers be involved with prioritization of what features to build, or if you're doing like OKRs, what problems to solve in what order. The more of this that we're talking about, the more it's pushing into a feature factory of this overly burdensome executive that believes they know better than people doing research, people doing like the trial and error of figuring out business, Yeah,
I think the takeaway would be probably twofold. If you're an executive like this, sooner or later, you're going to find out. Yeah. Sooner or later, right? And if you've been in the game long enough, you probably did that and bounced somewhere else.
Do you have a story of a overly burdensome executive that ended up being wrong? Sorry, I have one. I certainly have one.
Well, let's go and lead off with yours.
When I was in logistics, what the company would do is the company would hire these trucking executives in these nebulous positions of like, so a VP of strategic initiatives, right? And the strategic initiative basically was, we want to sell our software to your former company that used to be a hotshot director or whatever at. So they would hire them in. I mean, government does the same thing.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, government does the same thing. I mean, there's plenty of industries that do the same thing. And they would do that, and these executives would come on, and they would basically, like, with no broader context, just their anecdotal evidence from the company, that the one single company they worked at previously, would say, oh, everybody wants XYZ feature. Everyone wants feature X.
Let's go build it now.
Feature Z. We've absolutely got to build feature Z. And because they're a high-level executive, the more they push, the more, the director of development or whoever, people that are looking for promotions themselves, let's just make this person happy. Let's just, I know there's not bringing evidence. They don't really know how to do research. So let's just make this person happy. They would get these people, and they would last maybe somewhere between 12 and 20 months and really not contribute much. It'd take a lot of the development team's time, and then eventually wash out because they couldn't sell their company. They couldn't come out with any meaningful features because, again, I understand what the company was doing. They basically were hiring, like, they should have just called this person the VP of business development, because that's what they were trying to do. They're trying to expand our business into this particular firm they couldn't break through. But they should have never given that person authority to, like, greenlight features and all that kind of stuff. That stuff should have been gated off to a product manager to say, hey, what kind of bets do you want to do you want to try to put on the table, Mr. and Mrs. VP of strategic, special, grand poobah initiatives or whatever you are? Because the product manager would come back, and when they get grilled, they can say, I took this bet because your new strategic VP assured me that XYZ was definitely used by the company. The early prototypes, the people or whatever that they referred me to said they were going to use it, and then it never panned out. Sitting in front of all the executives and department heads, they're going to ask, how come it didn't pan out? And then there will come a point where you have to decide if you're going to tell the truth or if you're going to try to just quietly swallow it and move on.
Keep updating that resume.
I'm going to give them the facts and the evidence and just lay it out and be like,
they need to hear it.
Yes.
So I agree with that.
And I bring that story up. This is my real story about pricing and about greenlighting features, and it was sort of like parallel to pricing, to tell you that these folks were a dime a dozen in that. I stayed in that company for over a decade, and these folks came and went like clockwork.
I think that's not just limited to that industry either, right? I've
I've
seen that in bespoke software for vertical industries.
And it's definitely the way things happen in government.
Sadly.
So organizations that won't let product managers set prices have already decided product managers don't do product management. That's basically what we're saying on this podcast.
Right.
Scary, hard to hear for a lot of people, but that it is what it is. So diagnose your organization's pricing authority structure, which we already outlined earlier on the podcast. Who has final approval? Who is involved in the discussion? And also, a funny thing, Arguing Agile 201, it could be helpful in this podcast because the people that have say in the pricing, even from the outside, you could be mapping that stakeholder quad, the 2x2, high interest, low power.
Yeah. You're a stakeholder at that point, right? In that quadrant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then does that structure, whatever that structure is that you map out, does that map your feature prioritization? Because if it doesn't, you've got a
huge disconnect.
You've got some disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you found this useful, give us a like, subscribe on the podcast. Let us know that this was useful.